encontro um ano depois de chacoalharem o planeta com revelações que expuseram os maiores segredos do sistema de espionagem dos americanos e seus aliados. Desta vez num quarto de hotel em Moscou, a milhares de quilômetros de Hong Kong, onde o ex-agente da NSA, a Agência de Segurança Nacional dos Estados Unidos, Edward Snowden, entregou ainda não se sabe quantos documentos ultrassecretos para o jornalista Glenn Greenwald, americano radicado no Brasil, e para a documentarista, também americana, Laura Poitras.
You know, it was so good to see them again. They've walked through hell and back to report this story, and you know, they've really been put under a microscope, put under scrutiny by all the most powerful governments in the world. And I think they stayed on the right side of the line. They worked to minimize harm, and they worked to maximize public gains again and again and again. And you can tell when I give them a hug, I see that they understand that, you know, they have gone through probably one of the hardest years of their lives. And they've come out on the other side with their heads held high.
Os documentos, publicados principalmente pelo jornal inglês The Guardian, pela TV Globo e pelo americano Washington Post, revelaram que os americanos monitoram bilhões de pessoas no planeta, registrando a chamada metadata. Quem falou com quem, quando, por quanto tempo. Também registra todo o conteúdo de comunicações por e-mail, telefone ou redes sociais de vários países. Espionam empresas, a chinesa Huawei, de tecnologia de comunicação, a Gazprom, estatal russa de gás e petróleo, e a brasileira Petrobras. Até o Ministério das Minas e Energia do Brasil foi hackeado com a ajuda da espionagem do Canadá. Chefes de Estado têm suas conversas telefônicas e até mensagens de texto interceptadas. A presidente Dilma Rousseff foi um dos alvos. A chanceler alemã Angela Merkel também descobriu que suas ligações eram ouvidas e reagiu forte. O assunto foi parar na ONU. Embaraçou autoridades americanas, pegas no flagra, espionando aliados. E Snowden, que de Hong Kong tentava fugir para a América do Sul, foi parado no meio do caminho. O governo americano revogou seu passaporte. Snowden ficou quase 3 meses no limbo, na área de trânsito do Aeroporto Internacional de Moscou, sem poder entrar no país nem sair. Em agosto do ano passado, conseguiu asilo na Rússia. Edward Snowden se apresentou como responsável pelo vazamento logo que os primeiros documentos foram publicados. Segundo ele, para evitar que inocentes fossem perseguidos. Mas desde então, se afastou dos holofotes. Na semana passada, após indicar em que hotel deveríamos nos hospedar em Moscou, ele apareceu à nossa porta, pronto para falar.
You didn't do any interviews for a year, with a few exceptions of the Washington Post, one email interview with us. Why? Why did you decide now to come forward and give this interview?
So for me, when the story broke, I didn't want to be a distraction. I didn't want people to look at me, to think about me, instead of thinking about the issues. The problem was the media in a number of countries was just, they're so fascinated with the people involved that they won't leave it alone no matter what. So people still talked about me, and I stayed away to try to discourage it, but it didn't work. However, what's amazing is that in the course of the last year, despite the distraction that the media, you know, used pursuing me, is that the debate continued to grow. And because of that, I'm confident that today, now, nearly a year on from the initial revelations, I can talk about things, I can talk about how I feel, and it's not going to take away from the debate. It's no longer a distraction. I can't take anything away from that. So I feel it's safe for me to discuss my feelings.
Vamos começar pelo começo, quando o garoto de Maryland abandonou a escola sem terminar o ensino médio.
What are your influences?
I've had so many influences in my life that I don't like to pick out one. If I were to pick any single influence, without going into books specifically, without going into academic influences, I would say it's the internet. You know, I am a child of the internet.
How about people, family, friends that influenced you?
Like I think everybody, Anyone who has the benefit of close family ties can't help but be influenced by them. I don't like to talk about my family because it's very private. They didn't ask to be a part of this, and I don't want to drag them into my politics and my story. But you know, I've been inspired by the integrity of the people around me throughout my life. People who have been faced with really hard choices that were really uncomfortable, but somehow they found the strength to do what was right.
How did you learn about computers?
It was very natural. It was organic. I was kind of self-taught. I was fascinated with technology. When my father brought a computer home for the first time, or brought me into his office, and I used a computer there, I wanted to understand it. And then eventually I became that child who was always taking apart things, disassembling the toaster, and then not knowing how to put it back together. But then I had the benefit of a family that was smart enough to make the decision that if I'm going to take something apart, it should be something that I like, that I need to use, not the toaster oven. So when I take apart my video game, or whatever children are interested in, I can't use it until I figure out how to put it back together. And that was very helpful to me because it helped me begin to learn to understand things in a systematic way.
After 9/11, you decided to join the armed forces and go to Iraq. What happened?
So I didn't actually go to Iraq. I volunteered to do so because I believed in what the government was saying at the time, which was that the government of Iraq was creating weapons of mass destruction. They were planning to terrorize people around the world, chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and that the leadership of Iraq was a dictator, and the people there were desperate for freedom. And I thought it was selfless, it was a noble thing to try to help free these oppressed people and to do some good for the world. When I got to the Army, there was an interesting political awakening because I saw that many people there were not interested in doing particular good for the world. They weren't necessarily interested in contribution. They were thinking about either the benefits of service or they were trying to fill some sort of macho image. What I can say is that there were plenty of good people in the military who I respected, and they were better built for service than I was because I had an injury and I didn't make it through training.
And how did you start to work for the spying community?
It was actually very shortly after I left the military. I applied for a position in the national security community as a security specialist. And because of that, I had to go through clearance, background investigations, and that allowed me to begin using my technical skills at a very high level. And this was without a college degree. This was without any normal track record of this behavior. And it was very valuable because it gave me a chance to see a larger world and contribute at a very high level.
At which point you began to feel uncomfortable with the things you were seeing at work?
It was really sort of a gradual awakening because I've always been what I call a true believer in the value and decency of the United States and its traditions, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, our protections for freedom of speech, freedom of association, the right to a fair trial, due process, face your accusers, self-defense, all of these things that have existed for hundreds of years. So it was very difficult for me to become skeptical that there were officials in our government that weren't really interested in our traditions, that weren't really interested in our values, so much as they were interested in the pursuit of power. So it took me many years and exposure to many different things to begin to go, are we really, as a government, trying to do everything in the least intrusive and most responsible way? It's been not that they were trying to be evil, it's not that there's some evil empire in the United States, these officials, they're so insulated from the public by boundaries of classification and secrecy and unaccountability, where they can make a mistake or they can commit some crime and never be asked to answer for it. It allows them to act without thinking. And when you're the most powerful organization in the world, that's a very dangerous thing. But one bad decision from the most powerful government official in the world can affect millions of lives, even billions. And because of that, we need to have very strict controls, and we need to have a very high standard of responsibility in the top officials of our governments.
At which point did you decide to collect the documents and make them public?
The point of no return for me was when I saw James Clapper in front of the American Congress. He's the Director of National Intelligence, the most senior sort of spy official in the United States. The man who I was working for, more or less, raised his hand and swear an oath to tell the truth to the Congress on TV in front of the American people. And he was asked a question, does the United States collect the communications or collect any kind of records at all, on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans? And he said no. But I knew that was a lie because I could see the systems that showed exactly that. What was amazing was that the congressman who asked the question also knew it was a lie. And all of the members of the committee that was questioning this official, they also knew it was a lie. But they didn't correct the record. They didn't ask him to amend his statement. They just let it sit. And that's that central point, where if our most senior officials aren't accountable, if they can lie, if they can abuse their power and not face any consequence, it encourages more of the same behavior. We get a less accountable government that becomes more and more dangerous, not just to individuals, not just to privacy, but to the concept of liberty, the concept of freedom. Because when we think about all the reporting of last year, it's not about privacy, it's about liberty. To what extent should individuals be free? To what extent should we be able to call our friends, to talk to our girlfriend or our boyfriend, to ride the bus across town, to buy a book, to check out something at the library, to watch a movie, without that being recorded and watched? I think, and traditionally what we've always done, is required, if the government is going to intrude into an individual's private life, that they have to have some reason for it, that they go to the judge and they say, we need to watch this person, we think this person's involved in criminal activity. If we watch everyone in society all the time, if we watch every man, woman, and child from the time they're born until the time they die, if we create records of all of their activities, can they be said to be free? It has an effect on human behavior, because when we know we're being watched, we change what we do.
Brasileiros são reconhecidos no mundo inteiro como aficionados de videogames. O que poucos sabem é que jogando online podem ser espionados.
Even video games are watched by the NSA?
Yeah, actually video games are specifically watched by the National Security Agency, by the British Intelligence Agency, and other intelligence agencies around the world, I'm sure. In the United States, they claimed that video games would be used as a method of communicating for terrorists or spies. But it's really crazy, I think, because video games are insecure methods of communication. There's no encryption, there's no protection. And these companies, the companies that run the video games, they typically log the conversations for abuse to see if people are saying bad things, if they're committing some fraud. So why would terrorists use it? Why would spies use it? It doesn't make sense. But yes, the NSA has been monitoring it regardless. There are stories in the newspaper about it.
Some people say that collecting metadata is not that harmful because they are not watching the content, which we know now that is not true, that some of the content is collected and stored. What is so important about collecting metadata? What is so dangerous about it?
The problem is, when you assign a detective to follow someone, it's very costly, it's very invasive, you violated this person's sense of privacy, but because it's so expensive, It's only used when it's absolutely necessary, when the government knows we have a very good reason to do this. Metadata makes it almost free. There's almost no cost associated with it. So what do? Metadata monitoring that happens on a mass scale, and today we monitor metadata around the world. It's pervasive global surveillance. It means the United States government and other intelligence agencies around the world have assigned private detectives to follow all of us, every citizen, every man, woman, and child, around in all of our daily activities, to write logs of those activities and put them in a bucket, even though they don't need them today, just in case they want to know what you did some other time.
One thing that people ask very frequently is, how did a 29-year-old have access to all those classified documents? How did you access them?
There's sort of been a misinformation occurring in the U.S. media that was then propagated by the international media, which was that I was some low-level employee and I didn't really have any understanding of these materials. I was actually functioning at a very senior level. I had written policies on behalf of the United States government. I had I had been in meetings with the very top technical officials in the NSA and the CIA. The CIA's chief technology officer I had met with. And my role in some of these positions was when the U.S. government, when the Central Intelligence Agency, for example, had a technical problem that they simply couldn't solve, they needed experts, technical experts from private industries who had wide experience in all of these different areas to suggest, how can we do this? How can we fix this? How can we come up with a solution? And that was my job. I was what's called a systems administrator or a super user, which means that I had more access than almost any other official in the intelligence community, because even the director of the National Security Agency or the Central Intelligence Agency or any of these things, when they want to see some document, when they want to understand some program, they have to ask for someone, show me this, tell me about this, brief this for me. As a systems administrator, you are the person who can see all of that, because you are the one who controls all of the information.
Why didn't you release all the documents in a website, for instance, or to WikiLeaks that would publish all of them?
Well, first off, I think what WikiLeaks does is very important, and I think they have a role in the press. I think they're incredibly courageous and they take risks that other organizations run away from. At the same time, I had a very specific intention that I wanted to approach in my own way. I could have taken these materials and published them online myself, just sort of thrown them up in the air and let anybody go through them. But I didn't, because I felt the way that I could minimize my own political biases, my own judgments, and make sure that the public interest is always served, is by partnering with responsible journalists, by big institutions, major newspapers who I have a lot of trust in. I wanted to submit it to a system of checks and balances. Organizations like The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New York Times, Globo, Der Spiegel, all of these organizations, their editors could say, hey, we think maybe we should minimize this because it might cause some risk to some individual. And then they could go to the government and ask the government, is this dangerous? Is there something we don't know about this story? Can you tell us something that we should avoid, that we should remove, just to be safe? And by doing this, I can take myself out of the equation, make sure that I'm not making decisions for a whole country, for a whole government, for anything like that. And instead we can let the free press do what it does best, which is help citizens become informed voters and think about the kind of societies that they want to live in.
Did you read all those documents?
Yeah.
Do you know exactly what's in every one of them?
Yeah, I think Glenn's actually on the record. He's mentioned that all of the documents that he received were categorized, they were organized, they had been labeled. Yeah, I evaluated all of the documents that were provided to journalists through one means or another.
There's not a single week passed by this past year without a new document, a new revelation about the activities of the NSA and the Five Eyes. Is there still more to come?
I'll leave the news to the journalists.
Yeah, there definitely is a lot more to come. The system is unbelievably vast.
Sorry about the Portuguese. Ainda tem mais revelações sobre o Brasil?
Com certeza, tem mais documentos que vai mostrar brasileiros e o mundo que os Estados Unidos está fazendo dentro do Brasil e também o Inglaterra e outros países também.
Daqui a pouco, Snowden fala da vida na Rússia, do que espera do futuro e a impossibilidade de voltar para os Estados Unidos, onde enfrentaria um processo por traição.
Larger language. The bottom line is, this is a man who has betrayed his country, who is sitting in Russia, an authoritarian country, where he has taken refuge.
Do you think that it will come a time when you can go back to the US without being prosecuted for treason, which is what you would face today if you go back?
I would really like to think so, but that's not a question I can answer. That's up to my government. There's no question that if I could choose anywhere in the world to be, I'd be at home in the United States with my family, working for my government, and doing everything I can to continue contributing to the society that I love so much. But the reality is that there's a great resistance in some areas of government in the United States and some agencies of government, where if an official is embarrassed by the policies that they promoted, that they tried to keep secret so the public wouldn't find out, and then they're revealed, they can use their authorities to make things very uncomfortable for someone. Journalists have been asking the government again and again and again, can you show that anyone was hurt, that anyone was killed, that any lives were lost, that there was any harm or any danger caused by these disclosures? And they've never been able to show a single example, even though they've been asked again and again and again. But the political situation in regard to myself hasn't really changed. And I would like to hope that there will be a chance for a better public discussion about how we protect whistleblowers from the retaliation of government in the United States and other countries around the world. But until then, I'll have to wait.
Under which conditions would you go back now? You have a lawyer trying to negotiate a deal with the American government so you can go back home. What would be the conditions for you to go back now?
My legal team has a representative for the government to contact us to be able to have discussions. If the government believes we can help them protect some material, if they think we can contribute in some way, or if they are interested in coming to some kind of resolution that serves the national interest and is fair to all parties, which I think is clear. I don't think the United States government gains anything from trapping me in Russia, and I certainly don't prefer to be trapped in a foreign country. But as far as conditions, that's not for me to say. That's up to the government.
Do you still have some documents with you?
No. Because I knew I would be traveling through Russia, and I know Russia has a very sophisticated, professional, and aggressive intelligence service, I didn't want there to be any risk of espionage or that somebody could ask me for information. So I destroyed my custody of documents before I transited through Russia.
Some people in the US, and it was published by major newspapers, speculated that the Chinese had your laptop drained before you left China.
Right. This was a famous accusation made by members of Congress who had been embarrassed by these because they were responsible for the policies that have been revealed, and they needed some kind of attack, some response. So they said that I didn't know what I was doing. I was some guy who had all these laptops full of information just spilling out of these computers, and I walked through China and they drained them. They put a buck under it and they stole these secrets. But it's really crazy because I was a cybersecurity expert. I taught officials at the Central Intelligence Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, National Security Agency, how to protect themselves in areas like China against specifically these kind of things.
Some members of the Congress say that you are a defector. How do you see yourself?
So This is another one of those attacks where they use the same thing. The government calling someone a defector is very normal. It's like they're reading from a script. The bottom line is, you can't be a defector unless your loyalties have changed to an enemy of the state. And my loyalties haven't changed. I work for the United States government. Even today, I work for the people of my country. I don't work against them. I don't want to bring down the government. I don't want to destroy the NSA. I want to improve them. I want to make them better.
Would you be willing to face court in the U.S.?
I would love to face court in the U.S. If they reformed the Espionage Act to allow people to make a real defense. Right now, the Espionage Act is a very unusual law. It prohibits people from making certain defenses. I can't even argue my case to the jury. I can't say that I was serving the public interest. They don't see a difference between someone who sells a list of agents' names to have them executed to an enemy country during a time of war, and someone who takes information about government abuses and gives them to the press to report in a responsible way. But as it stands now, there is no chance for me to make a case. There is no fair trial waiting for me at home.
Why China and Russia?
So I never chose to go to Russia. It wasn't a final destination. I was actually on my way to Latin America. I even had a ticket booked. This is public record.
Where to in Latin America?
Ecuador at the time. There were pictures of journalists on the plane to Havana from Moscow looking at my seat. But the problem was, as I wanted to board the plane, the United States had canceled my passport. They had revoked it and said, no, he can't travel anymore, because they wanted to freeze me in place. And at the time, they didn't have any effective criticism of me. They didn't have any way to go after my reputation. So I believe that a political decision was made that if they trapped me in Russia, they could say he's a Russian spy without having to prove it. I think it was done for political purposes.
Since the moment you were spirited away by those two Chinese lawyers in Hong Kong to the moment you could leave the airport here, how was that? How did you go through that period?
It was incredibly tense. You know, there was a level of uncertainty where you don't know what's going to happen that same night. You don't know what's going to happen when you go to sleep. You don't know if there's going to be a knock on the door. You don't know if there's going to be people who break down on the door. All you can do is trust that you're doing the best you can to do what is right. And maybe you make some mistake, maybe you don't do things perfectly, but as long as you're motivated to good ends, you're careful, you're responsible, and you make sure that even if you don't succeed in creating some gigantic public benefit, if you at least cause no harm, you can be confident that no matter what happens, no matter whether you end up in jail, no matter whether you end up dead, you can be confident and comfortable with the decisions you've made, and that's how I felt.
Fiquei numa sala, tiveram 6 agentes diferentes que eles estavam entrando e saindo.
Em agosto do ano passado, o brasileiro David Miranda, companheiro de Glenn Greenwald, foi detido por 9 horas no aeroporto de Londres, acusado de terrorismo. Ele trazia documentos vazados por Edward Snowden da Alemanha para o Brasil.
How did you react when you learned about David Miranda being detained at Heathrow Airport?
I was shocked. I mean, I don't tell the journalists how to work or what to do, so I'm not sure exactly how they operate, but it's my understanding that David Miranda was working for The Guardian at the time. They had paid for his flight, and he was working as a sort of correspondent role for them. And for the British government to accuse someone working as a journalist of engaging in terrorism is a shocking claim.
After being trapped at the airport without this kind of pressure, you could relate to the situation, right?
Well, I think he had a much tougher time than I did. Yeah, it's not knowing what's going to happen to you. Losing your sense of agency, losing your ability to determine your own future is a deeply intimidating thing. And the fact that he could remains so committed to his principles in a situation like that, I think says very good things about him.
Was that the way you felt?
Yeah. Well, wait, about him?
About yourself.
Oh.
Losing the ability of determining your future, to be the agent of your...
Absolutely. When I went public in Hong Kong, I wrote a statement that said my intention was to ask the world for justice, and that's why I made these claims for asylum. When you take your future and you put it in someone else's hands like that, it's scary, because you have to believe in the goodness of people every day, at every hard decision, at every difficult point.
How's your life here in Russia?
You know, it's really not as bad as they say. There are, you know, no country is perfect, and Russia has some political policies that I disagree very strongly with. They monitor the internet in ways I consider inappropriate. They regulate the press in ways that I think no government should do. But my day-to-day life, you know, it's much better than prison.
Can you go out?
Yeah, sure, why not?
You're not seclusive.
No. Well, I'm naturally seclusive because, again, child of the internet, right? Some people...
So your life is online.
Right, right. Some people, they want to go see landmarks, they want to visit tourist locations. I would rather read, I would rather write, I would rather communicate, discuss issues with my friends, with the people I trust, and try to build things, to try to engineer things, to try to create solutions and sort of improve the world around me in the best way that I can.
Do you have any kind of security? Do the Russians watch you, or?
Well, you know, the Russian services, again, I'm sure they're involved in some kind of surveillance, but I don't see it. For me...
It's not ostensive.
No. For me, if I need security, I hire security, but I prefer to be open and independent as much as I can. You know, I can't, for safety reasons, get into, you know, where I live and how I travel. But I would say I live a surprisingly open life.
People don't recognize you on the streets?
They recognize me when I go to computer stores. But you know, when I'm in the grocery store, when I'm, you know, looking at magazines, things like that, you know, nobody really recognizes me.
You blend in.
Yeah, you know.
Do you wear any disguise, or you just go out
it's probably better.
Edward Snowden face?
Probably better if I don't answer that one.
What do you miss most?
My family, of course.
No próximo bloco, Edward Snowden fala da espionagem da NSA contra a Petrobras e a presidente Dilma Rousseff e diz que adoraria receber asilo no Brasil. Ainda este ano, Laura Poitras lança um documentário sobre a saga de Snowden. E Glenn Greenwald acaba de publicar simultaneamente em 25 países o livro Sem Lugar para se Esconder, no qual conta os bastidores das reportagens que ganharam os maiores prêmios de jornalismo este ano.
Most journalists, they have to fight for months in order to have a source that will open up, that will give documents, a good story. And in this case, you had to insist for months for Glenn Greenwald to install an encryption program so he could have the documents. And you almost lost the opportunity of doing the breaking news of a lifetime.
Yeah, you know, I think the reason why I like to tell this story, even though, you know, some people say, oh, it seems embarrassing for you to tell, is because it makes some important points. What the reality of what happened is, you know, he didn't contact me and say, hi, I'm Edward Snowden, I work at the NSA, I have, you know, many thousands of top secret documents I would like to give you, and then I just ignored him. What actually happened was that he was very afraid, in retrospect, for reasons that we now all understand were very valid, that if he were to speak to a journalist without it being very protected through encryption, there was a very good chance that the United States government would know that he was going to do what he did. And so he was very worried and basically unable to tell me anything about what it was that he wanted or what it was that he intended to do. All he was really saying was very vaguely, I have some things I want to talk to you about. And until he told me things about him and what he had, I wasn't really making him a priority. And until I made him a priority, he couldn't really talk to me about what he is. So it really underscores that this surveillance that he has helped bring to light is not just a threat to privacy, and it's not just a threat to democracy, that it all takes place in secret, it's also a threat to journalism. So it worked out in the end. He was very persistent. He went to Laura Poitras, of course, who did have encryption, and then she involved me. But that difficulty, the reason I tell that story is to encourage journalists and everybody to use encryption, but also to show how dangerous of a world it is when the government can know everybody who's talking to everybody else.
If I could follow up on that, I would say one of the most important things for me about that situation is that it's a case study of how encryption is so important but also so difficult to use. Nobody's communications are going to be secure, whether they live in Brazil, whether they live in the United States or anywhere else, unless we all have access to these tools and they're invisible to us. Without you having to install programs, without you having to learn all these things, but it happens by default, without anybody making special steps, because people naturally, we can't be bothered.
Were you frustrated when he didn't install the encryption program?
I think it's fair to say yes. I mean, I tried several times, several ways. But I also expected that was a possibility. I mean, it's a big ask, and it's reasonable. Everybody expects journalists to, have priorities. They're busy people. They've got stories they're working on. And if you're just some guy saying, "Hey, I've got something you need to know, but I need you to do this really complex, difficult thing," it's understandable.
Documentos vazados por Snowden e mostrados pela TV Globo tiveram grande impacto no Brasil.
Were you able to follow those stories from here?
I was, and I was fascinated by them and the reaction to them. It's amazing that in every country in the world, people highly value privacy. Nobody wants to be spied on. We feel the sense of violation. And when we think about it objectively, we go, what were you hoping to find? There's really no explanation, no justification for the U.S. to be spying on Brazilian oil companies. Why does, the American president want to read Dilma Rousseff's emails? What's the benefit? What's the gain? Now, there has been some argument from the president in the United States saying that he was unaware of these programs. And to some extent, that may be true. He has also agreed with me that these programs are not helpful, that they don't have any value, that they haven't saved any lives, they haven't promoted the interests of the United States, and for that reason he ended them. He said, no, why are we spying on these people? Just stop, it's not helpful.
Were you able to watch President Dilma's speech at the UN?
I was inspired by that speech. It was incredible because the Brazilian president was the first president, I think, that took a very strong leadership role on saying, we have a right to be left alone, we have a right to speak, we have a right to communicate, we have a right to associate freely without being monitored, without being watched. And these are not civic rights, these are not national rights, these are human rights. The progress that we've seen in Brazil with the passage of bills like Marco Civil are extraordinary, but they're only the beginning. They don't go far enough. We can't just give speeches, we can't just pass national laws, we can't just make small changes. We have to create an international standard through which our rights are respected, they're codified in law, and they're enforced through the standards of our technology.
How do you think that we as individuals and society, as a community, can protect ourselves against this?
So one of the biggest solutions to this is technical. We need governments to invest in education and research in mathematics, in technology, that will allow us to secure communications not just in some city, not just for some service, but for the entire world. And the way we do that is through advances in technology and the standards that are used to secure them, the standards that we all agree to communicate by. Because Brazil could pass the best law in the world for protecting their citizens' privacy, but as soon as a Brazilian citizen's emails leaves the borders of Brazil and goes to another country, that country has the choice of going, oh, do I follow this law, do I not follow this law? Nobody will know. If we enforce our values through technology, that problem is solved.
Every now and then, American press says that you would offer Brazil information in exchange for asylum. Is that an offer on the table?
Absolutely not. I could not be more clear. First off, I don't have any documents to offer. Secondly, even if I did, I would never trade secret information or cooperate with some government in exchange for asylum. Asylum has to be granted on humanitarian grounds. It has to be granted to protect political rights or the right to safety. This whole topic about sort of negotiating for asylum, I think, is improper. If Brazil wants to offer asylum, if they want to stand for human rights, if they want to protect the rights of whistleblowers, I think that's a good thing, and I would certainly encourage and support it, whether it's in my case or the case of anyone. But I would never engage in any kind of sort of deal or quid pro quo exchange.
It's been a year since the first revelation, and very soon it's going to be a year since your asylum here was granted. What's next when it expires?
My asylum does end, I believe, the very beginning of August, and I still do need to receive permanent asylum. And if Brazil and the petition and the efforts there results in the government offering asylum or some other kind of permanent status, I would be more than happy to accept it.
More than 1.2 million people signed the petition asking President Dilma to give you asylum. Would you like to live in Brazil?
I would love to live in Brazil. I think Brazil has a great reputation. They're a growing country. They're rapidly developing, not just economically, but in so many new ways with science and technology and culture. Even their gaming culture, you know, online. Brazilian gamers on the internet are recognized by people around the world. Even their in-jokes, their cliches. Brazil is a country that I would love to go in. I would love to live in Brazil. And you know, if 1.2 million Brazilians would like to invite me, I would definitely welcome their invitation and be happy to accept it. And in fact, I already sent a petition to the Brazilian government requesting asylum. So if they chose to offer it, I would definitely accept.
So you did send the request?
Absolutely, yeah. Back when I was in the airport, I sent requests to countries around the world. Brazil was one of them. It was a formal request.
But the Brazilian diplomacy said they never got a request.
That's news to me. It could be, maybe there's some procedure they say wasn't followed. Many countries have said that you have to be in their national territory to apply for asylum. Maybe they've done that. Maybe that's something for people to follow up on.
You know, tens of thousands of NSA's employees, people working for national security, for the spy agencies in the US. Do you feel like you're a divergent?
No, actually, I think the people who work for the NSA, the people who work for all of these different organizations, they're good people trying to do good things in a hard time with a lot of morally gray choices. The problem is not the people at the working level. The problem are not the rank and file employees. The problem are the senior officials who are setting policies, and they're making bad decisions, they're making bad policies, and they're creating unlawful programs that they know can't be defended. So they use secrecy to protect themselves from embarrassment and accountability rather than to protect the nation from any kind of real threat. And that's a critical problem that we need to reform, but I know for a fact there are other employees around the intelligence community in the United States who were deeply concerned and unsettled and troubled by the same programs I was, because anybody who looks at these programs, regardless of whether you work for the NSA or whether you work for NBC, can see that these go too far. There's a line between what is necessary and appropriate and what we're doing simply because we can. And the President himself has said the time in which we do things because we can is over. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should, and I agree with that.
Do you think that the way the NSA operates is really helpful to fight terrorism?
It's not.
And efficient?
It's definitely not efficient, and it's definitely not effective, and you don't have to trust me to say that. The first court in the United States to ever review this program in the open found that these programs had never stopped a single attack or saved a single life in the United States from any kind of imminent terrorist attack. They also said it was Orwellian in its scope and violated the rights of everyone in the country. The President commissioned 2 independent White House investigations with full access to classified information to look at everything the NSA had done with these programs and to see was there any unique value that justified continuing these programs, and they said there was not, and the program should be ended. One of those investigations said the program had no basis in law at all and never should have been begun. And the Congress in the United States, both houses are now saying these programs need to be reformed, they need to be ended, and protections need to be instituted to make sure something like this never happens again. I think that's an incredible statement, an incredible rejection of the fact that these programs are necessary and appropriate for defending terrorism, because if they were, would all 3 branches of the American government be saying we need to end them?
Are you happy?
I am. It's been an incredible challenge. It's been a really tough year. I've worked harder than I think I've ever worked before, and you know, it is hard for me to be separated from my family, to be unable to go home, to be able to participate in my government and my society as fully as I'd like to. But at the same time, I can go to sleep every night and be confident that the choices I made, even when it was really hard, were what I felt were the right choices. And because of that, I can wake up every morning with a sense of satisfaction.